Dr. Roger McFillin, thank you so much for joining the In Good Faith podcast.
It's an honor to be here. Thank you.
Let's get straight into it. One thing that's really struck me about your work, your writing, ever since I got into it, which was not so long ago, maybe it's just been a couple of months, is how you unashamedly and quite directly speak about the divine, speak about God, and the importance of the spiritual in the context of mental health. That's something which I found so refreshing. Um, Explain, justify yourself. How come this is your approach?
Well, it's a really good question, and it's probably would take me quite long to explain everything. So I'll try to give you the Cliff Notes version. Um, Bottom line is this: I've had some spiritual awakenings in my life, things that would not be explainable by just our understanding of the material. I did grow up in a Catholic environment and felt like that religious aspect to my life was important, but it wasn't sufficient for me to feel connected to. Uh, we can use the word God. I know there's other people of different faiths and religions, but to me, it's an all-loving guiding force. And my relationship to God felt very ceremonial, as is in the Catholic Church, and it didn't really lead me down the path where I felt connection to my fellow human beings, to something that was beyond me, and fully aligned with a sense of purpose in my life. About 5 years ago, I was really awakened by a number of events. And in those events, I started a process slowly but surely to enter into stillness in my life. And that was to learn really how to quiet my mind. And when I did that, I received access to what I can only explain as a divine wisdom, an energy, and an intelligence. In being able to do that, I've been able to find ways to send messages to my clients, people I've been helping, other people in my life, to write my Substack. I use the word downloaded sometimes because that's how it feels. It feels like it comes through me, uh, a place in my heart that is separate from my mind. I think this awakening that's occurred in my life has been transformational. It's changed the way I understand emotional pain, the purpose of my life, the journey that we're all on in order to move closer to love. And I would have been gifted with a way to see the challenges in Western societies around the mental health epidemic that exists from a new light, new perspective. I've always been somebody who was very investigative, asked questions, challenged authority. And to do that, it took me down rabbit holes. I examined research. I understand everything there is about the psychiatric industrial complex and how they have engaged in fraud and flat out lies about the nature of their drugs, violating informed consent and medical freedom. And uh, I used to just think that was financial. To, I really thought it was about perverse financial incentives and some degree of naivety and poor science. But as I entered into stillness and I asked and I received, I understand that the world is much more spiritual than just the material. There is energetic forces that exist beyond our five senses. We can even measure this now in post-material science. And I honestly, with all my heart, in feeling that as being divinely inspired and guided through me, is to recognize and to be able to communicate that the use of psychiatric drugs, distractions, propaganda are all to disconnect us from that wisdom, from that emotion, and to drive us towards more of a anti-human, transhumanist way of approaching our own collective humanity. In doing that, we have surrendered our autonomy, our freedom, and uh, the understanding that emotions are gifts to be understood. We're in a chronic disease epidemic, a mental health epidemic, and I think partially because we've become disconnected from each other, we've been disconnected from nature, we've been disconnected from God. We've muted the signals with these drugs, and people are now fully attached to the idea that they are broken, that they are broken whenever they feel intense emotions, struggle, are in conflict, when they have intrusive thoughts, when they go through difficult periods in their life, when they experience loss. And they've been mass conditioned to turn to the medical authority to take a drug, an experimental drug that acts on the brain in ways that nobody can clearly understand, but we know the consequences of such are horrific. And I'm speaking out against that. I'm trying to get us to understand again that emotions are not dangerous, but when we do judge them to be and we enter into fear, we're missing those divine guidance signals. We're also suppressing and numbing those signals. And I think those are root causes of disease and root causes of suffering.
If I may, I just want to track back to what you said at in the early part of your comments. Um, you mentioned growing up in a Catholic household with a Catholic upbringing, and then not so long ago having this sort of awakening type of experience, which it sounds as though what you're describing, if I may use the term, almost like a spiritual but not religious type of framing now in terms of how you see things. Is that fair? Is this like almost like a post-religious, almost post-dogmatic way of understanding yourself and understanding the world?
That is fair. I used to think about God almost like a white robe, long bearded man in the sky who passed down judgment and directed us, and we prayed to him. It was outside of us. And I engaged in rituals in order to deal with the fear that I had about being separate from him. And that never served me, nor the institution of the Catholic Church didn't serve what I felt in my soul. I did end up treating survivors, victims of clergy sex abuse. Um, and that certainly changed my perspective on the powers of authority, and moved away from the following the Catholic religion in that manner. Um, and then saw church really to be anywhere where I could connect with God. And I now believe that the largest sin and the biggest illusion is the illusion of separation. And when we enter into the illusion of separation, that we are separate from God and that we are separate from each other, that is suffering, and that is pain, and that is a root cause of war and poverty, and a lot of the pain that unfortunately our collective humanity has bestowed upon each other. And so when I see myself as possibly, I guess the best way to explain it would be a ray of sunlight from a greater sun, or a drop of water in a vast ocean, and that I can connect with God with inside of me and actually surrender to that will and feel that passion and allow him to kind of express through me. I feel I'm more in a higher vibrational state. I feel spiritually connected to everyone around me. And I see every experience as a holy one. And it's changed my life, because now when a client comes to see me or I'm on a podcast with you, I see that as God's will to connect us. And I see it as a holy experience. And I engage fully to the best of my ability in the present to be able to experience God in that moment. And it's enhanced my life. And I don't see emotional pain or struggle as something wrong. I see it as part of all of this on our path. In fact, some of our greatest wisdom and strength comes from our darkest times. And I see that with people who I work with. And that brings me closer to divine wisdom and connection, brings me closer to God. I'm more willing to surrender. And so I never see those dark times as something to pass judgment on, only to shine light. And so if we prevent people from their darkness, I feel like we prevent them walking towards the light. And that's where I feel like the spiritual war exists. And that's why I think there is such an effort to cut us off from that divine connection.
And just to stay for a moment with the issue of religion and faith, because a lot of the viewers and listeners of this particular show are Muslim. They would describe themselves as Muslim. And I suppose there's an ongoing conversation within the Muslim community, generally speaking, around contextualizing traditional principles, or the tradition as a whole, scripture, revelation, etc., in a modern context, etc. But just from your perspective, can traditional religion still be followed, adopted in a way that is still healthy, in a way that unlocks the kind of things that you've spoken about? Because a lot of what you're speaking about is very familiar to me, based on things that I've read and studied and try to experience and understand myself. a lot of the Christian mystics, for example, right, from the past. Even just some of the things you were saying reminded me of the often quoted Meister Eckhart, for example, within the Christian kind of framing. But they were sort of retained a Christian, it seems, a Christian identity, whilst focusing on perhaps the more spiritual and mystical end of of religion. So is there good religion and bad religion, or actually is what you're thinking is going to be happening perhaps over time, or what maybe is a healthier move for humanity overall, is to almost move into this post-religious, non-dogmatic, I don't know, more universal, label-less type of existence?
It's a great question, and forgive me too, and where I am in my ignorance in all of this. I'm walking a path just like everyone else is, but I'll share my thoughts. Like any institution, yes, it can be corrupted, and it can be used for evil. And traditional religious practices and institutions can be used for the good of God and all of humanity. So both are possible, right? I do think that darkness can invade institutions and in a lot of ways present itself as if it's doing good when it's doing harm. So as long as, for me, as long as organized religion reflects the goodness of God and love and forgiveness, and allows people to move closer to what their soul's purpose is and to experience that love and act in good of all of humanity, everything that comes with it, yes, I think can be positive. I think the traditional rituals and celebrations can bring families together, offer an organization of one's day in order to connect energetically with God. Um, in love, this can be extremely, helpful for all of us. I think when it leads to division, like when we see Christians versus Muslims versus Jews as if they're separate from us, obviously, I don't think that is within God's divine will. So, will there be a universal faith? I don't know. I feel like I follow the teachings of Christ. That's what I know. I see him as uh, embodied as God in the physical body, Son of God, but I also see you as a Son of God as well. So, that's kind of where I shift from maybe traditional Christian dogma, as I see the spark of God is within all of us. And I think that's what Jesus was trying to teach. And so those universal principles of love and forgiveness are really, really important. But I also live in a world where religion has justified murder and war and division. And I just don't see that as abuse of power. I don't see that as of God. I see that as a spiritual darkness.
And then do you think that with regards to having good mental health and achieving well-being, that the particular conception of God actually matters? You spoke about how important it has been in your journey to move from almost a man in the sky conception to this energetic force, more transcendent, but also deeply personal, almost internal kind of presence. Um, could you maybe speak to that, and maybe just elaborate a little bit more on this, because I think perhaps that links to this notion that you're touching on of the illusion of separation.
Yeah, it's a really good question. Everyone's personal relationship to God is personal. Who am I to speak to what it may look like or who it may be? And I don't want to. All I can share is that I close my eyes and I invite this energetic force of wisdom in, and what I receive is love, and what I receive is this sense of guidance and understanding that I can't do when I rely on myself, my ego, this version of me. I've tried to do that in the past. It fails every time. That just I'm using my mind in separation to understand things that I'm limited in being able to understand. We're in a three-dimensional world, and with humility, I ask for guidance. I experience that spark. And what I receive and what I'm allowed to experience when it's in love creates a vibration in me, and words come out of my mouth that are not my words. And I've grown up with other family members who experience God differently, where there is a reverence and a subservience, and they engage in ritual practices. It could be praying the rosary, and it provides them tremendous peace. So I think I am not here to pass any judgment on what that would be. I could only explain it to myself, for myself. I know more what it is, and I know more than what it's not than what it is.
Mm.
I know it a loving connection, and it's a force. And whenever I'm motivated and passionate and engaged to do something which feels like it's in love and in betterment of humanity, I just know that's in God. And when those words come out of my mouth and they're serving somebody, by its fruits you shall know it. And it has that response. I feel that force of God, and I'm also a human being. And I fall down and I fail and I make mistakes and I end up in fear and I'm confused. And that's a state of separation. And I do everything I can to get in a state of alignment. And when I'm in a state of alignment, I feel healthy. I feel like my body is at ease. When I'm not, I think everything about what I'm designed to be physically is now at dis-ease, and so I think I'm vulnerable to getting sick, and I'm vulnerable to being run down, and um, I believe that's only allowing us right now to begin to tap into the potential of what our body is capable of as a self-healing mechanism when we're in alignment of God, with God, and when we're out of that state, how important that is for us to look at, just from a health perspective. Like the modern medical establishment is grounded in materialism and atheism, and everything is separate from God. And I think that's a concern, because a lot of root causes of disease, I think, are certainly based on being out of alignment and in that state of disease. And I wish we could see things cross culturally. I wish we could come together, understand like traditional Chinese medicines, um, other indigenous cultures who have worked hard to be connected to nature, and then they've lived their life according to some of those laws. And I think they're just healthier people. And the more we get disconnected in this capitalistic machine that seems to just be eating all of us up, and getting us further disconnected from nature, and further focused on just, I guess, serving the machine, I think the sicker we become.
It's often said we're living in a meaning crisis, and that obviously links very much to, I think, to what you've said around the fact that we are living in this sort of materialist or atheistic kind of paradigm. Although it seems as though in recent times, well, it's often said God is back, and there seems to be something of a religious type of revival, perhaps because the emptiness of atheism is just intolerable, right, to a person. So people are looking back maybe to think, well, maybe I missed something in in actually what. Perhaps sometimes some of the religious structures or some of those more sort of spiritual ways of seeing existence. But is it how would you answer the question of what is the meaning of life then? What is the purpose of life? You've spoken to it to a degree, but what is it? What is the point of it all? I mean, from your perspective, why are we here? And because I think that lack of objective, or that kind of lack of an overarching narrative, seems to be it seems to be central, I think, to a lot of people's sense of confusion and loss, and therefore their exposure to being manipulated in the ways that you speak about.
Think deeply about that question. I ponder it, I pray on it, I meditate on it. Part of my spiritual awakening has been things that have come to me both through me, through other people. I believe we are a soul. I think our souls inhabit this physical vessel, this learning vessel, temporarily on this three-dimensional plane. I believe our souls have incarnated many times, many lives, many different realms, many different dimensions, many different places. I think we choose to come here with some challenges to overcome. And it's within those challenges we learn, and our soul grows, expands, becomes more like God. We are creators. We are creator beings. That divine spark of God, God creates through us. So I think we are here to be creators, but we are here to learn. And I get into these very esoteric and philosophical questions with my clients because many are in deep suffering. They ask those greater questions. If there is an all-loving God, why would there be rape? Why would there be child sex trafficking? Why would there be war? Why would there be hate and racism and all these things? And I've prayed on those questions. I've been influenced by a book called Radical Forgiveness, which has changed my life in the way that I work with clients. And I felt like it was provided to me as a gift from God through a client. And in that respect, everyone who comes into our lives is part of a greater soul group with purpose, and there's an interconnectedness to all things. Sometimes some souls will come in to take on a role to harm another. And then other times, the free will aspect of being here is we are vulnerable to choosing that evil or darkness or selfishness. And we do that in the illusion of separation. All of that is for our own growth. Because in my experience, the greatest transformation comes out of the darkest periods. We live in a energetic world of polarities. And the polarities are always restriction and expansion, restriction and expansion. And that's how the universe works through physics as well. There's restriction and expansion. And the greatest expansion comes after a restriction. So if you reflect on your life, some of the most challenging times were the greatest catalysts, almost like it sparked a fire or a flame. And there's something in the psychological literature called post-traumatic growth. And then we see that, like, you go through something extremely traumatic, and then you become more loving, more wise, more interconnected, more empathic. And it might even spark a creation, a business, a way of helping people, an innovation, art, music, all these things. And so I see that's our experience. I also think we're here in these physical bodies to also enjoy the experience, the learning and the enjoyment and the beauty that exists on earth and the beauty that exists in relationship and in love. But I think everything is for us to get closer to God and to learn. I'm influenced by post-material science, near-death experiences. I've interviewed a number of people who have been clinically dead and have died and then returned. And they all tell very similar stories. And in those stories, they talk about the life review, where you review your entire life over again, but from the perspective of everyone else who experienced you. Right. And then there's this learning, and then you're like connected to, I know why I was here. I have a mission. And they return, even though they were in this space of like overwhelming love, freedom, and flow that there are no words on earth to explain, but they chose to come back to this dense field anyway, to enter into pain and enter into struggle because they had this awareness of this interconnectedness of all things and how important their mission was for others as well, and for them to learn. And the life review is like powerful because now you experience how you make other people feel, and you experience your actions and its impact on others. In some ways, I question whether love could potentially be, or hell could potentially be, what we receive when we harm another. And this is biblical too. What you give, you will receive. And so I think that may be part of it. I also think hell can be on earth and you can create heaven on earth, at least like an energetic, joyful, high vibrational experience. So I know that's a complex answer to a complex question.
No, beautiful. I think, and I think what you just said last was really important actually, because I think what I find is that oftentimes people, when thinking about the heaven hell as future sort of post-death destinations only, then yes, it can actually bring sometimes a kind of a bit of a defeatist mentality in terms of the experience of life here, in the sense that people will suffer. It's as if things can't get better. It will just suffer through certain things, maybe not with a view of seeing the potential for transformation in this life, but just hoping for a better state, subsequently down the line. And obviously, I think there's a place for that, but there's something around collective human effort to avoiding hell on earth or moving towards heaven on earth. I think that's quite a powerful framing. And in fact, it reminds me about, it's often said, there's a famous scholar that's often quoted from the medieval period who said that, the person who doesn't achieve a sense of paradise, within themselves, to paraphrase, perhaps shouldn't expect, paradise subsequently, meaning it's a state to be cultivated now, as opposed to just something external to be potentially, arrived at later.
Yeah, well said. I mean, I do think I think God exists in the eternal now, and so I'm doing my best every day to be there. The mind wants to take us elsewhere. It wants to sometimes escape. It wants to plan. It wants to predict. It wants to worry. And I know when I'm in that state, I'm at my worst. So I do my best to try to ground myself throughout the day, just so I can be present and experience what's there.
One thing you mentioned earlier is how this campaign to de-link people from their essential nature, their true selves, has been very deliberate. And also, I've seen some of your more recent writings are talking about, in some detail, about the very unfortunately successful ways in which human beings have been dominated, have become subservient to other human beings or these nefarious kind of forces. And you mentioned in particular one of your writings, which I think would be quite interesting for you to elaborate on, if you don't mind, the Milgram's sort of experiment, basically, and about how people just were, sort of submit themselves to authority to do ridiculous things sometimes, and they just go with that. So the spirit is suppressed. It seems so easily suppressed. So what is it about us that allows us to be so vulnerable, actually, to such that we can then depart from our true selves that easily?
That divine spark in me, that creativity, drove me down this direction for research, and so I'm currently in my current obsession in my own rabbit hole. But as a clinical psychologist, there's obviously I have this intense curiosity about human nature, and so I have recently started a Substack series on mind control. Since I fully believe that there is an intentional and even spiritual battle that is existing, that is trying to prevent our energetic upgrade on Earth. Another book that supports this is a great book. It's called Pure Human by Greg Braden. I would suggest people read that. It's public knowledge that transhumanist, anti-human agenda exists, is trying to alter the human DNA. And I personally believe our human DNA is a kind of like the best way to describe it is it's an advanced technology to connect to God. And there's a lot in our cells, the mitochondria of our cells, our DNA, that unlocks this human potential for self-healing and divine connection. And the way to disconnect us is through technology, through pharmaceuticals, and they do that pretty well. So I became interested in how do people in positions of authority, governments, institutions, influence and control the masses. And so I want to understand the history of mind control, whether that is reading everything I can on MK Ultra and CIA experimentation to understand the depths of our human nature that has led us to engage in behaviors that are so self-destructive and harmful to each other. We kill each other. I mean, let's think about it. We're a species that kills each other. We kill our own offspring. That is certainly seems to me like that is it's something that has led me to believe that we are all in some way conditioned and influenced by some innate survival mechanism on this planet. And so there's a few things. This is where I'm at in what I've published up to this point. The first thing is that we can be placed in a trance-like state. We can move from a beta brainwave state to an alpha. And during that period of time, into our subconscious, we can receive messages that influence our emotions, our health, our actions, our behavior. And that's done through repetition. That's done through news media, social media. That's from you being in a trance like state. In the book, Outwitting the Devil, the author Napoleon Hill wrote, discussed this as being in drift. So the more that we are not in stillness and in that connection consciously, we're absorbing messages. So you saw this during COVID, where everybody started repeating the same things. And I've seen this as a psychologist, is that you see that there is just not that much difference between people anymore. And they're repeating the same phrases, they're thinking the same way. And then I had to realize that this wasn't just culture, it was programming. And so I've deep dived into aspects of authority and authority bias. I wanted to know how 80% of the American public took a experimental mRNA technology that altered their gene sequencing and was never a vaccination, just based on blind trust of authority for a disease, for a condition that was more or less a cold for everybody. So they didn't trust their natural immunity, their natural response. They were provoked in fear, clearly. And not only that, we suspended our rational thought. No, so a good example of suspending rational thought, and this is what fear does, is you believe that somebody who's unvaccinated is dangerous to a vaccinated person. It makes no sense, right? Because if you were vaccinated and it really did inoculate you and prevent you from the disease, how could you be at risk from somebody who didn't have the disease, right? So you created this in-group and out-group. You divided people in fear. You spread a misinformation campaign. You said the words all over again. And I saw what that did to the American people, I'm sure much of Western societies. And so the Milgram experience the Milgram experiments is a great example of this, because there's a version of that which is taught in American public schools and in my postgraduate training, and it was to push the idea that human beings are subjected to authority. And this was, for those of you who have not heard of this experiment, it happened on the campus of Yale University. And what they did is they had a paid actor. They were told that this was going to be a memory learning exercise. They had a paid actor who was going to be receiving electric shocks. So they were to read a script. If they got the answer wrong, they were going to administer an electric shock to somebody they believed was receiving it. You were provided an authority figure dressed in a white lab coat who had just clear instructions. And they would continue to get the person to administer electric shocks at a higher and higher level to potentially a fatal level. Each point, the person would scream louder. At one point, the actor would say, "I have a heart condition. You're going to kill me." And then there would even be silence. And what came out of that experiment was 67% of people would follow the authority all the way to killing the person. These are average people that they got from the town of like New Haven, Connecticut. They were teachers, they were engineers, they were plumbers, they were housewives. And it showed this inherent ability, or this inherent vulnerability for people to suspend moral judgment in the face of an authoritative actor who's telling you have to do something. It's quite disturbing. I think we can trace that back to our earlier lineage. If you were part of a tribe, if you didn't stay part of the tribe, you were going to die. So you learn to follow the tribal leaders, and it's built into our DNA. And so that gets provoked in times of fear. We have to learn how to override that to protect ourselves from mind control. What they didn't tell you about the experiments, which was clearly part of MK Ultra and funded by the US government, was they did all different types of variations of this experiment. They conducted it in places outside of an academic institution, like a rundown kind of building. They took the lab coat off of the person in authority. They had somebody resist ahead of them, and then they measured what happened to everybody else. And what you saw is compliance decreased with every variation. And the most important thing for people to know is when the participants witness somebody else disobey the order, then 90% of everyone else disobeyed. Only 10% followed the directives. And it's kind of a message for all of us, is that when we become separated from each other, we don't get to observe noncompliance. We just absorb the messages and assume everyone else is following along. And that's the way you keep a country or a group of people controlled in fear. And so part of my mind control series is to start exposing the principles, the playbook, so we can awaken and not be under this degree of fear-based control. And that's the purpose of my current Substack series.
So let's have a look at how that links then, or how that maybe is applied specifically in the context of mental health, psychiatry, psychotherapy. I know that you have a number of contrarian views when it comes to all of that. It's difficult in some ways to know where to start. But one of the things that you've been very critical of is the state of psychiatry. And in fact, I just wanted to ask you whether you think psychiatry as it is today should even exist. Meaning, is that category even a relevant or a helpful category vis-a-vis something like psychotherapy, which is a less, from what I understand, almost deliberately a less medicalized way of seeing the issues that it's actually trying to treat. So is seeing the particular issues that psychiatry is trying to deal with through this kind of medical, chemical, sort of biological sort of lens, is there any place for that? Or is it just that it just needs a radical revision?
A radical revision is required. Psychiatry is an illegitimate medical establishment, a medical authority. It is a net negative on society. The Western psychiatric perspective is a failed paradigm. It's an arm of the pharmaceutical industry and the authoritative state. Everything it has done has created more illness and despair and dependence. I think that's clearly obvious by any outcomes that you want to study. To reduce the human experience to a faulty brain chemical is propaganda that has been pushed on Western cultures and has now led to a drug epidemic. I see we take episodic struggles and we turn them into chronic disease and chronic illness under the guise that it is a mental illness that needs to be managed for the rest of their life. It's based off a failed material paradigm, and it doesn't even meet the lowest standards of materialism. You're told you have a condition, name it: bipolar disorder, ADHD, obsessive compulsive disorder, schizophrenia, whatever it may be. It's labeled as a mental illness. They're said there's a biological origin to it, but yet they can't measure anything. Any attempts to do so have been met with utter failure. It's based on genetic determinism, and even that is such a low standard. We've never identified any genes that would lead to it. So we know very, very little. All we know is that we're mass assigning labels and mass assigning drugs. And in the United States, a quarter of the population has been on at least one psychiatric drug. It's been devastating. We're providing drugs to children during key developmental periods. The drugs are mitochondrial poisons. So let's take it back to what I said earlier about our DNA being a direct connection to God. Like, there's literally light that comes out of our cells. You can measure that. And when you destroy the mitochondria of the cells, you're destroying and dimming the light. I think that's really important. That light is that metabolic energy that feeds our entire body. And that's why you see people go on these drugs, they become metabolically ill. And the side effects of that are usually things like emotional blunting, sexual dysfunction, sedation. You're literally dimming the light of the person and submitting them into compliance. And then you measure that as a treatment effect. And it's just a chemical effect. The psychiatric industrial complex that includes all doctors can take away your freedom by assigning you a label based on an opinion. Often these are the most limited and least intelligent of all doctors, unfortunately. We'll be clear about that because you can't be very intelligent and follow this model, right? You're nothing more than a drone, and then you become nothing more than a drug dealer. It should be very clear about this, that they are an enemy of liberty, freedom, and health. And to see it any other way would be denying reality. Show me where you've restored health. Show me a mental illness you have cured. Show me where you have compassionately taken somebody from a difficult time and then restored their sense of agency back into their life. You're not going to see that in modern day psychiatry. The only person who's a psychiatrist would do that who abandoned the entire paradigm and the entire system. That's why I'll make it my life's work to take that down. The psychotherapy industry on its face is less damaging and can be supportive and caring and loving and helpful. It also can be part of the medicalization of the human experience, depending on how you're trained, how your country sets that up, again, in the paradigm in which you view the human experience and struggle. So I view psychiatry as extremely dangerous.
What is the alternative? I mean, especially I'm thinking about, viewers or listeners who might have themselves, or maybe a family member, especially who has experienced the symptoms of what then is called, a psychotic episode or bipolar disorder or schizophrenia or any of these types of things. I can imagine that there's a combination of perhaps a recognition of what you've said. Something doesn't feel quite right about the way in which this thing is being treated, and they don't necessarily see any improvement or any pathway to an actual restoration. But at the same time, there's an incredible fear that in the absence of giving these medicines, drugs, that the situation will get even worse. So can you help a person who's in that kind of scenario to actually understand what the pathway to restoration might actually look like, and what safeguards can be put in place to avoid things worsening and things sort of retreating?
Good question. Yeah, I certainly understand people struggle with what we label as severe mental illness, and in rare circumstances, someone can become a danger to their self or others. That is not to deny the fact that in emergency medicine, we may use a pharmaceutical to be able to stabilize an episode where somebody hasn't slept for a couple days, or somebody may be experiencing a delusion that is dangerous to themselves or others. So that chemical response in emergency medicine, in very rare circumstances, could be useful. That's not what we do, though. We take those experiences, don't understand what contributed to it. We label it with a disease when it's not a discrete disease, and then we treat it in ways that make it worse. So even when someone has psychosis, viewing it as a medical disease in itself that needs to be drugged for life has worse outcomes than what we call third world countries. So even the experience of alternative consciousness or experiences of reality that are different than the one grounded in that this three-dimensional world, other cultures can view that from various perspectives. Some even spiritual, some going under the guidance of a shaman, or going under the guidance of somebody within your community. And at the Scandinavian countries, they have something called an open dialogue program, where when someone has a psychotic episode, a team comes in, meets with them, and understands the meaning to it, and supports them in a vulnerable time. And then what we see is like substantially better outcomes. Like first episode, psychotic episodes become only first episode. No one goes on drugs. No one's hospitalized. So the understanding of it from the Western medical paradigm is extremely flawed, and they're lying. It's not a disease that we've been able to treat. Now, with that being said, there might be something actually biological or um, another medical condition that just gets mislabeled as psychiatric. So, mood instability can be influenced by many factors. In my work, we have such a drug problem in the United States that a lot of people become diagnosed with a major mental illness like schizophrenia after substance abuse problems. Cannabis is an example, and the level of THC in cannabis in the United States right now is at dangerous levels, where we see an increase of psychotic episodes. They go into the psychiatric system and they diagnose these people schizophrenia or bipolar. We see episodes that could be related to a trauma response or circadian rhythm disorders or adverse reaction to a prescription drug or nutritional deficiencies or autoimmune conditions. We see them get labeled like bipolar disorder or something more serious. It actually stops the investigation into legitimate problems. It actually stops our progress scientifically in understanding why people get sick. So I think it's a failed paradigm, but I also can empathize with the fact that since we don't really know the origins, that people feel like they have to surrender to what the medical authority is telling them they have to do. And unfortunately, that is to me, it's become a form of eugenics, because it decreases the life substantially of people that are being labeled as, like, genetically inferior. I have real concerns about the origin of that.
But then, for those living within these kind of paradigms where they might not have access to somebody with the knowledge or the healing capabilities, let's say, or the wisdom, if you like, to steward them through this particular process, what then? Because I'm still maybe not feeling entirely clear on then what the suggestion or the advice might be to. I'm just thinking, especially in a kind of family context where somebody maybe then has suffered some of these episodes, maybe a stabilized post a first episode. Is it just a question of love, care, counseling, therapy, talking? Like, what is it that will actually, do you think, help this family kind of go through this process?
Yeah, I know you're in London and you're in the city, and I think what you're going to do is you're going to say, how can we continue to live what we've become accustomed to in this modern society, which is creating so many problems, and how can we solve the solution within that in this current context? Like, I want to stay living in a city exposed to EMFs. I want to be still living uh, in this overcrowded area of life that's becoming more and more disconnected from each other, where people are eating food that's pretty much poison. And how can I just solve this problem? Well, the truth of the matter is, where do we have the best outcomes is there's something called Soteria houses have the best outcomes for chronic, what was identified as chronic mental illness. And that was living in the country, connected to nature, completely changing your diet, and then figuring out and understanding who you are and how you want to live. So yeah, no, I guess if you're in the city and you have no idea why someone's deteriorating, there's a reason, but you have no idea if someone's deteriorating in your crisis situation, you don't have great options. You're going to be drugged and under the care of somebody else and then probably disabled. But I need to know what the problem, like, what is going on? What happened? Like, what is the origins of this? Is this person abusing substances? Is this person sick? Is this person in a traumatic uh, or even dangerous environment? What is happening? So you can't ever ask a question on how you're going to respond to somebody unless you really know everything that has influenced it. And I think it brings up great questions about the way we live. I mentioned earlier about that machine. I mean, we've become consumers. We're not even producers anymore. We just consume, 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 and get further detached from our own collective humanity. Like, we're seeing that psychotic episodes can be triggered through AI. And now, we've had this influx of technology. We have supercomputers in our pockets. We are now becoming more and more transhuman, because we're almost like fully connected to that computer. And then there is an energetic frequency that is used to kind of fuel all of that human beings never were evolved to experience. So you have that shift in energetic frequency on the earth at the same time. That's another thing about the materials paradigm. You can't see 5G, but 5G affects you. It affects the body. And it's even when you're in a city and you have noise pollution and other pollution, and then you have that at what amounts to be like levels that are quite damaging to human cells. What are the outcomes of all that? So, I mean, we haven't scratched the surface, but I can tell you the way we live is making us sick.
Can you say more about nature? You mentioned it a couple of times. For those who live in cities and can't necessarily move permanently outside of cities for the time being, I certainly am very passionate about being in greenery and going out for hikes and being in nature, and I kind of force that into my kind of schedule to make sure that I'm seeing enough of the real world, let's say. Can you speak more about that, maybe from personal experience? Why is it so important? Why does it make such a difference?
Well, when I said that we became disconnected from nature, God, and each other, I mean, I can say God is all of those things. The earth vibrates on a healing frequency. So when you go out and you ground in nature, there's a healing vibration that extends through your entire body that is necessary. And that's also how we evolved. It's healing. And when you measure objectively other interventions to things as simple as like a nature bath or sun exposure or exercise in nature. I mean, nature wins all the time. Like, we are not separate from nature. So when you separate us, we get sick. We need and we require that time in nature, clean air, the sun, even in the wintertime, even if you're in the northern hemisphere during these months. And if you can find 1 hour, of experience out in that sun, even if it's on a cloudy day, it has profound effects. Fire emits red light. Red light is extremely important for the mitochondria of our cells and the way we function. So, I mean, I can't underestimate it enough. And I'm a novice. I just know it's really important. And when I'm there, I'm at a sense of peace and calm, and my mind slows down, and I'm less stressed, and I feel better. And I know we can measure this. I know there's an energy and the frequency, and so that's why if you destroy nature, it's going to destroy the planet. It's going to destroy us, and it's quite dark to destroy that in matter of of consumption of resources.
I know in one of your pieces you wrote about the feeling that you had sort of before and during a particular conference that you attended recently, I think the Future of Mental Health in America. And you spoke at the beginning about some of those feelings of being, even though you believe so deeply and firmly and you have absolute conviction in the way that, in what you've been laying out here, you almost feel like you need to give yourself a sanity check, right? When you're in the midst of an environment which is so dominantly putting forward the alternative discourse. I'm just wondering, like, if you can maybe speak about your experience in and amongst, let's say, your colleagues and those who are practicing, in this space across America. What kind of reception have you had, and are you gaining, let's say, comrades or colleagues, in this, joining you and in this, in this. Well, I want to say in this fight. I don't want to say this fight, but it is, I suppose. You said a spiritual battle earlier, so yeah, I suppose that's what it is.
The conference I attended, which was the Inner Compass Initiative, was mostly psychiatry dissidents. It was harmed patients. It was big names in this movement, including big names from the UK, like Dr. Joanna Moncrief was a keynote speaker there. And so it was a friendly environment. But even that, when I did my talk, I saw half the room like get up in their chairs. Some of them a standing ovation, while others were like squirming in their chairs because I'm talking about things like God. And in the mental health world, and if you're a medical professional, you just never mention God, right? Because, I mean, that's been taken out of our healthcare centers completely, and you're certainly not taught that because that's unscientific. And I challenged the materialist paradigm, and I just really spoke to how comical some of these ideas are. I mean, for the lack of a better word, because you have to laugh or you're going to cry. It doesn't even make sense. It suspends all rational thinking, and it's just bizarre how we get into this and we start talking about ADHD like it's a real medical condition instead of just a set of symptoms, or same with bipolar, or we made up major depressive disorder, like all these things, and then we talk about what are the consequences of that. But I spoke from a place of passion. I connected to God before my talk. I asked him to speak through me. I felt like I channeled it. I don't even know what I said. But afterwards, people came up to me. Some of them had tears in their eyes. People thanked me, said it was inspiring that I said what they think but are afraid to say. And it was probably the best response I've ever received for any event. And so it just inspires me to do more. The problem with where I stand, I think we're gaining momentum. I probably wouldn't be on your show right now unless, you became aware of what I'm doing. I'm a bestseller on Substack, and sometimes often in the top 10 of rising publications in health politics. My platform's growing, my podcast is growing, but I'm stuck in an algorithm. And in my algorithm, and concerns me, it just filters like people who agree with me for the most part. 4 years ago, I was dangerous. I was, an idiot. I was somebody who shouldn't be speaking out. And I'm a psychologist, not a medical professional. I was attacked. My license been investigated. People who I've never met put poor, horrible Google reviews, right? I'm actually more scared that has stopped to an extent, because now I'm not reaching the people who I need to reach. I'm just reaching the people who agree with me. And that is purposeful. That's why I'm talking about what I'm doing with the mind control, or the brain, and the mass conditioning and censorship and a number of things, because I'm not able to help awaken all the people that I want to awaken to this. Sure, it's growing slowly, but I get strengthened. My argument strengthens when I get somebody who vehemently disagrees with me, and then I learn. I learn how to dispute that argument, and I learn how to do it in a way that answers the questions for people who are afraid. So I want more opposition. I want to talk to the people out there who think I'm a quack, and I want to be in debate with them, because that's the only way that I can move closer to truth, that we can all move closer to truth, and then people can make decisions for themselves in an informed way. We just, unfortunately, have not met the standard of informed consent and medical freedom, at least in the United States.
It's so interesting what you said about the algorithm, because I think I definitely have felt that in recent months, in the way that essentially, yes, what starts out as seeming or feeling as though it's a countercultural message then gets essentially siloed into an echo chamber where, yes, a number of maybe followers who go with that argument, or they appreciate that, you find yourself within that space, and then it feeds maybe particular narratives to the people who, well, they're the ones who would respond to that narrative anyway, so to speak. But maybe it, like you said, it decreases the amount of dialogue across divides. And I think certainly on a political in political divides, it's very, very similar. I think I was in a conversation with someone not too long ago where essentially we were talking about how to resist the rise of the far right in the UK, which is a kind of a big topic at the moment. And he told me, how he had just come out of a meeting and discussions with a number of people, maybe slightly more on the left wing, to see like how they would respond. And I was asking, well, okay, fine, that's all very well, but when are the leaders of these kind of cohorts, if they're going to speak to each other rather than everybody preaching to their own converted?
I am really concerned about division. I think that's what people in authority do. They try to divide the people, get them arguing with each other, and then they don't actually hold their government accountable for the decisions they're making. I call it there's a uniparty in the United States. I don't see a major difference between the way the right and the left govern in the United States. Yeah, there's all these hot button cultural issues that they don't do anything about once they're in office. They just allow the people to fight and with each other, and then choose a candidate that is best aligned with some hot button cultural issue, and then they go and govern in the same way that they always governed. So I just see what the scam is. Fortunately, too many people just fall for it and have lost any sense of being able to hold government officials accountable. We have too much of a large central state in the United States, and I support decentralization, a limited government, and I think the best government is local. But that's far gone. Far gone in our country. Unfortunately, I just want people to be aware of how division is used and in groups and out groups are created in order to keep us all fighting.
Are you optimistic about change within what you've called the mental health industrial complex? I mean, what will it take now, do you think, for things to change? Is it a mass, resistance, or I think, according to your new language, awakening, if you like, on the grassroots level? Because I know that you used to end your articles with resist, and now it's moved to awaken. Maybe you can speak to that. But I really want to understand, you know, the pathway and almost the strategically most intelligent things you think that need to be done in order to actually undermine the existing system as much as possible and try to actually promote the alternative and start to develop the alternative a lot more swiftly. Do you remain optimistic?
I do remain optimistic because I do believe in this divine protection and movement of human nature towards awakening. And I do believe that, as has been prophesized, I do believe that this awakening is occurring now vibrationally on the planet that brings us to closer to like a 5-dimensional way of living. I think we're in transition. Uh, this been discussed from many different perspectives, and in that you become more aware of the interconnectedness of all things, and I think love strengthens. And so it starts with awareness and allowing that divine spark within all of us to be lit. And then you start pulling yourself out of the system. There's no longer a market for it. Through education, through informed consent, through awareness, then people stop outsourcing their own authority to a medical professional. You move out of a disease-centered medicalization of the human experience, and you see yourself as self-healing, and you alter the way that you view the purpose of your life. And then you begin to regulate your own emotions because you no longer see them as dangerous. And then we return back to communities, support and wisdom and elders and guidance and stories, and um, eating real food again, being connected to nature, because it's just who we are. We awaken who we truly are, and we move out of the illusion of separation. And that's what ultimately leads us to healing. So I wanted people to awaken and not resist. Resist is too active. It's actually feeding energy to that dark energy or those authorities that we have to fight against them, when we just have to say, no, they have no authority. They have no power. It's active non-compliance. You don't give it attention anymore. And then you rebuild in what's our alternative systems that make sense and are aligned with these divine principles of love and forgiveness and caring for our fellow humans. And you move away from the illusion of separation, and it's going to take care of itself. It's kind of like I guess, a fire. It keeps burning. It keeps burning. If you don't give it any more firewood, it's just going to kind of go out on its own. I think that's the best way. And so I hope we focus our energies in ways that are not in fear. And I think my argument is a sound one. I think when most people read my argument, it makes sense. It's part of that awakening. I think it's logical, but it's also it fits with their, I think, most of our like collective morality and first do no harm. And so I'm hoping that we just continue to have these conversations, and then you see these alternative settings kind of be created because they're better. And in these healing centers, and the way we change and the way that we interact with each other, maybe we get off all the distractions. We stop poisoning ourselves. We stop getting hooked to screens and phones, and then you see communities will be cultivated, and that's what I believe is happening. And so that's why I feel optimistic.
Just on that I mean, how do you, what advice do you give around smartphone usage? What, in your mind, because just to make it super practical for people, and I'm conscious of the irony that many people will be watching this conversation on a smartphone, but what is healthy smartphone usage? And is it to do with the amount of time you spend on it, or is it to do with actually whether you are producing versus consuming, consciously consuming or just passively consuming? How would you do you give advice around that to your own patients, and what would your advice to viewers and listeners be?
I do. I think it should be quite limited and intentional. So the biggest problem I see is that it has become an unconscious automatic act without thinking. When I ask people what's the first thing you do when you wake up in the morning, 95% or say I go right to the phone. What do you do on that? Check my messages, scroll, all those things. So that shows me what you're worshiping. You're worshiping technology. You can't even be in silence, and your brain has to be constantly activated. And now you're just consuming all that information I said was being placed in there when you're in an alpha state, a non-conscious state. So I think the mornings are really important. I try to suggest that people stay away from that phone in the morning, that they should be in stillness, have a cup of coffee, read the Bible or the Quran, or read some literature, exercise a little, get outside. And then when you use that, use it intentionally. If it has to be for work, use it for work, set some limits around it. Make sure all the notifications are off. Make sure you're not in that phone and that blue light, at night where it's affecting your circadian rhythms. Shut it down. And I'm really communicating, I think, what a lot of people are doing. This is within the Jewish faith as a day of Sabbath. Charlie Kirk, God rest his soul, was talking about a technology Sabbath. You take a day where you're just disconnected from the screens, when you're disconnected from the phone, and you connect with family, and you go outside and you pray and you get used to stillness. Move away from the television too, and consuming news. Like, all these things are just extremely detrimental and harmful, and we have to pull back and we have to go in the other direction. It's fine to have it on to listen to music. I know people do that, or you put on maps on your phone for the car ride, or like those things. I can see its usefulness, but I mean, even text messaging itself, it's altered the way we use language and communicate each other. People are constantly having to look at it for constant communication. It's hijacking the brain, and the consequences have been catastrophic. It's just no doubt about it. You have to change your relationship to that technology, or you will be just completely captured by it, and you're not even full human. You're part computer, and that's a real concern for me.
And maybe just to close off, two things. You mentioned 5-dimensional living. We can't let it end until you explain what exactly that is. And also, right at the beginning, you laid out this very deliberate attempt towards transhumanism, and so that there's this kind of dark vision for humanity, for society, which is being, I suppose, which is then going to be the opposite of 5D living. I mean, it might not even be 3D by that point; it might be something flatter. So if you could just maybe speak about these contrasting visions, I think that would be a useful way to maybe sort of round this off. What is that awakened, enlightened 5D version of life? And what is the flatter, darker, transhuman version?
Humbly here, I say I'm still in my early stages of fully understanding this, because they've been messages that have been provided to me in stillness, or through books, or through channels, or through relationships. But we can start measuring. There are already people on this earth who exist in more of a 5-dimensional reality. And I would really encourage people to understand like quantum physics from a scientific perspective to understand such things. And what does that include? Well, telepathy is measurable effects, our ability to be able to experience each other's mind, to see us as energetic beings. We experience the energetics of others. Time as a construct probably restricts, and we have the ability in consciousness to travel. I think we're uplifted in understanding the interconnectedness of this energetic force on Earth, which changes the way we treat each other. Like when there's a change in consciousness, there will be no pain or war or death. I think we're moving in that direction. You can even meet kids who have these tremendous abilities, who are able to stay connected to that. Um, the telepathy tapes is a fascinating podcast I would encourage people to listen to. Post material science, where energetic healing exists, where I can influence you, like my ability to actually heal you through consciousness, our impact on thoughts
Please do
and
that, by the way.
I don't know.
Anytime you want. Feel free to send the positive vibes. Yeah.
I certainly enjoy listening to people who are mastering this, and it exists. But also like just the impact of like your own thoughts have on matter. We've seen this in studies where you just give a plant loving thoughts, you bless the water, and it changes its molecular structure, and then the plant just thrives. And then you do something on the opposite end to another plant where you just like are judgmental, critical, and you direct negative energy towards like the water, and then you see it slowly die. I mean, we're just scratching the surface on this. I think we, in our divine connection to God, are just a higher state of technology than anything that can be created through these advancements with AI and so forth. And so you see this, it's this desire of principalities on this earth to achieve a godlike status, to overcome death, to have consciousness survive, but through upgrading through technologies. And I think the goal is to prevent that upgrade on earth, that consciousness upgrade. And the way you do that is you have to stay in a lower vibrational state. The lower vibrational states are like fear. It's a big one. That's the strongest one. Fear, shame, depression, anger. You stay in that lower state. The collective vibration of the earth doesn't increase because it's emitting from us, from human consciousness, from our bodies, from our fields. I think the connection to God, which may be within the Bible, might be this prediction of a second coming, which is a second coming in consciousness or energy of our Christ consciousness, possibly. And so it's the rising of that field of being connected to God, of being able to heal ourselves and each other through that alignment. And it's an emittance of a loving energy that is like very healing and allows us to achieve higher states of consciousness. That's the way I understand it now in my limited purview.
And then the opposite, the transhuman sort of agenda. What does that look like, and what is the ultimate intention there?
I think the planet to be run by AI, to upgrade or shift what is the human body created by God, to alter it in a very dark and sick way. And this is public information. Like, this sounds conspiratorial. I think 5 years ago, I'd be judging myself right now for saying this, or like anyone else would say it. I'd be in judgment. I think they're a quack. But just go to the World Economic Forum and Agenda 2030. Like, go seek out those who are transhumanists. They believe there's too many humans on the planet. There's a depopulation movement. They think it's a flawed species that has to be upgraded to a supercomputer, to AI. They're trying to change human nature. And It's shocking, I understand, but it's real, and we have to face it.
Well, Dr. Roger McFillin, I salute you for your efforts. And if I may say so, if I may share, as you were speaking, because I'm quite well versed with the Quran, and so a lot of just these verses were sort of jumping out at me as you were speaking, and I just wanted to maybe share a couple which I think might really resonate with you. Um, you will have heard the Arabic word jihad, right? And obviously in America, especially and elsewhere, that word has become really associated with something very, very negative. But the Quranic kind of the word in Arabic simply means to strive, to struggle. And the idea in the Quran is striving in God's cause. That's what's actually mentioned, meaning to facilitate a move to the light from the darkness. And it's one of the most powerful kind of concepts across the Quran. And a couple of the verses that come to mind, one actually in the context of the difficulties maybe in that striving. So in the voice of the divine, in translation, we will most certainly test you until we know who the true strivers are from amongst you and who's truly persistent. And we will test the assertions that you make, right? Meaning that you will be forced into through those tests and trials and difficulties, that synchronicity between intention, action, sort of direction, all of these things, and until there's a maybe greater and greater refinement in that. And another one, that those who strive for us, the royal sort of we, let's say, for the divine, those who strive for us, we will most certainly guide them to our roots, and God is most certainly with the people of excellence. So there's that withness, that is mentioned about God being alongside the true striver and that kind of facilitation. So I certainly see exactly what you're doing and the way in which you obviously describe your intent as absolutely striving in that cause to facilitate God consciousness ultimately, that connection. And I love the way in which you have integrated this this sort of messaging and this reference to God just directly and interwoven it into your sort of scientific expertise, your knowledge of the field, and you continue to be on that path. And I think that certainly for again many of the sort of Muslim viewers, one of the things that I'm sometimes critical about in terms of the approach for what we find within our community is that there is Muslim counseling emerges, Muslim psychology. But what ends up happening is that it's just directed for those within the community. So there's something that whilst it's trying to again resist the dominant paradigm, you can see the issues in the paradigm, but what ends up happening is a kind of a set of terminologies, maybe jargon, language sometimes, which then only is directed to those within the community, which has its place, of course. But I think what's really powerful about what you're doing is that basically anybody can actually hear and understand what you're saying. Anybody can find maybe a different way of maybe appreciating or conceiving God and understanding that there is that personal connection to be made, that relationship to be developed and built, and a way then to understand themselves, their own well-being, and the broader context in just a very integrated way. So I really appreciate that. And I wish you all the very best, and I'd love to have you back on here one day. Maybe we can see where you get to in a year's time, God willing, if we're around, and we can, hopefully you've made a lot of progress. And if anything I can do to facilitate support, and I'll definitely kind of link all of the promote your work to all of the followers of this particular show. Yeah, it's been a great honor. So thank you very much.
Well, I'm very grateful. This was a great interview. I really appreciated the depths of the questions, and really allowed me to think and continue to try to understand what I am trying to communicate. And you're right, I'm on a path, I'm on a journey, and there's humility in that. I'm sure 1 year from now I will see things more clearly, and but I'm really do appreciate your willingness to be able to have these type of discussions.
Absolutely. No, thank you. Until next time, Godspeed.